record this for your listening pleasure. And what we're going to be doing, guys, is Mr. I'm going to call you Mr. Not, because when you get on the mic, you could say how you want to be referred to, but we'll see what you want to be referred to. And so I'm debating Mr. Not or whatever it is. And the topic is, does God exist? So he's going to be giving arguments against God's existence, and I'll be giving arguments for God's existence. And I asked him, does he want to go first, or does he want me to go first? And he says he would like to go first. So before we start, does anyone here have a clock who would like to be the timekeeper? All righty. So, and by the way, Mr. Not, if you go a little bit over, no big deal with me. All right. So go ahead, Mr. Not. Here's the topic. Does God exist? And we have about 5 minutes, and he's got Joshua's got a stopwatch. Okay, Joshua, as soon as he starts talking, after about, give him like a little extra 5 seconds buffer there, because he's going to let us know how we want to refer to him. He's an atheist, and so I'm going to take the side of theism. He's taking the side of atheism. So here we go, guys. I'll get off the mic.
Hello, I would like to introduce myself. I am Mr. Nada, and you would refer to me as an agnostic atheist. No, they are not mutually exclusive categories. I do not know whether or not there is a God for sure, but I reject the claim that the claims that are made about gods because of insufficient evidence, or what I see as insufficient evidence. I don't believe in God for the same reason that I don't believe in leprechauns or fairies or unicorns. Because I can't prove they don't exist, but I don't believe they exist based on insufficient evidence. That's where I'll start first of all. Now, I commonly hear arguments like the cosmological argument and the ontological argument, and I do think these arguments tend to make assumptions. And first of all, the cosmological argument, I believe, exploits a logical fallacy, which would be special pleading, because it contends that there must be a first cause that eliminates an infinite regress that results from everything needing to have a cause in the first place. And yet, if God does not have a cause, then you're logically inconsistent unless you explain where God came from, and then you haven't solved your problem at all. You've made things more complex, because rather than just saying the universe spontaneously created itself, which would still be special pleading, I will admit that, but it's less confounded than having a complex supernatural being, and most people theists tend to claim it as a personal God, not an impersonal force. So that's kind of where I stand on that. There's also the teleological argument, which I will, I think I'll address here too, which is that design is apparent in things, and I will admit there is an appearance of design in the universe. The universe appears to have rules and constraints and general characteristics, but to say that something intelligent had to decide that, I don't think we have enough evidence to establish that. We have the creator of the universe is not a testable force, and also, if you consider a designer, there are little flaws in every organism. There's no such thing as a perfect organism, because well, yeah, you're going to make fun of me for this, but evolution is constantly trying to select for organisms that are best fit for the environment. Never perfectly fit, because an environment is a multivariate space with many different factors. And also, the reason that life appears designed is because life must adapt to new circumstances, and different characteristics fit different conditions. I think I'm going to finish up there.
All right, cool. Let me adjust my mic, Mr. Nata. Okay, how's that, guys? Hold on a second. Let me go back. I don't want to make the. Hold on I want to get my mic just right. Okay. Okay, you guys get ready for the time period. Ready, set, go. Okay. Right out of the gate, I think you guys noticed my friend. Nada here. We don't know each other personally, but I'm calling my friend. He admitted that he cannot prove that God doesn't exist. Well, then also we listened, and he didn't give any arguments in favor of atheism. In fact, he said he's an agnostic atheist. Agnostic and atheist, they're not the same thing. Agnostic means you don't know one way or the other whether or not God exists. That's what you're claiming. And atheists claim God doesn't exist. So to say one's an agnostic atheist is really to say you're unsure about your atheism. And I can tell by your arguments, my friend, that you are unsure about your atheism. First of all, let's go through, well, what I wanted was some arguments against God's existence, and you were very kind getting on the mic, but there's nothing for me to talk about. You didn't give any arguments against God's existence. So all I have to do is give some reasons, arguments for God's existence, and I like the ones that you talked about. He talked about the fine-tuning, and he said that he does agree that the universe does have the appearance of design. And what the fine-tuning is about, the teleological argument, it doesn't just posit, okay, design. What it does is it looks at three plausible explanations for the fine-tuning of the universe. Dumb luck and chance, number one, like randomness, necessity, like physical necessity, something in natural law, or design. Everyone in here, the majority of us, if you actually go through this, if you're rational, you would say, well, it can't be due to dumb luck and chance. The more plausible explanation is not due to dumb luck and chance, because there's not just 10, 20, 30 of these fine-tuned constants. Go to ShockofGod.net and look, there's like over 40 of them. So dumb luck and chance falls off the table. There's only physical necessity and design left. Well, it can't be due to physical necessity. Science has already proven there's nothing in natural law that would show that these constants are that way. In fact, it's like an intelligent mind just created them that way. So it follows plausibly the more rational conclusion is design. So the teleological argument is not a good argument to bring up if you're trying to prove that atheism is true. Matter of fact, it's one of the worst ones. It shows the complete opposite. But I am very glad, my friend, that you brought it up. The cosmological argument, you talked about that. Well, that's not a good argument you want to bring up with if you're trying to prove that atheism is true, because the cosmological argument basically says that whatever created the universe has to be immaterial, timeless. It has to exist necessarily. Well, some people think that numbers, for example, exist necessarily. And people think that God exists necessarily. No one thinks that God was created. If something had to be created, then it wouldn't be God. God exists necessarily. And he's also not a material object, and Scripture says that he's spirit. So if it's down to numbers or God, as the cause of the universe, the cosmological argument. Well, let's look at it. Numbers, it couldn't be numbers. The number 8, for example, doesn't have causation. It can't create anything. So it is more plausible that God created the universe than numbers did. So the cosmological argument shows that the universe did have a beginning. And by the way, I really appreciate you getting on the mic. And by the way, how much time do I have, guys? Whoever's keeping track. I appreciate getting on the mic, but you had said that, let's see what you said. Oh, you said that God was created. No, Joshua, we were just doing like 5 minutes. 5 minutes time. So anyways, I'll pop off the mic here because I want to, give him a chance. But what you were saying is the argument, the cosmological argument is whatever exists had a cause. That's not the argument. In all due respect, my friend, you got it wrong. The argument is whatever begins to exist has a cause. And remember, we posited numbers could exist necessarily. Some people believe that, and God exists necessarily. They never began to exist. So just to wrap it up, because I want to let him get on, you could, and now this is the rebuttal stage where you can rebut our arguments and stuff. We didn't really hear any arguments against God's existence, and I showed that the arguments that he actually brought up favor God's existence more than atheism. So, but I'll save that for the rebuttal stage. And then as much time as you want to spend on the rebuttal time is up to you, and then I'll go after you're done.
Well, when you talk about proving that God doesn't exist, that's what you would call a shifting of the burden of proof. I am not making any absolute claim that God doesn't exist. I am simply saying that I refuse to believe in something like a God because to me it has not been demonstrated to exist. So it's, and you can't prove a negative. You absolutely cannot. You cannot prove that, for example, unicorns might not exist somewhere in the universe. As for everything beginning to exist having a cause, I can understand why you think God would be some sort of thing that could arise, would have to be out of necessity, but I really don't agree with you there, and I think that a lot more investigation needs to be done in the realms of physics and cosmology in order to try and determine that, because even by those criteria, if you say that God begun to exist, if you say that God never began to exist, is that not just the logical fallacy of special pleading again? And as for numbers, numbers are just abstract concepts that we come up with to explain, to quantify objects in the universe. So don't really know where to go with that other than just what I've said there. As for atheism and agnosticism being mutually exclusive, I still disagree on that, because if I was a Gnostic atheist, I would declare with absolute certainty that God doesn't exist, and I am not saying that. I'm open to the possibility. You can also be an agnostic theist. You can believe that God exists without claiming that you're absolutely certain of it. Bill O'Reilly is a person that fits that bill. So, and you can go look that up. It's him and Richard Dawkins. I think their 2007 video, his 2007 interview of Richard Dawkins, and you can also be a Gnostic theist, of course, which is you think God exists and think that for absolute and you believe that with absolute certainty. So I think I'm going to give the mic over to you now.
All right, thanks. Out of respect to you, I want to make sure I'm talking about what you're saying. You brought up fairies and unicorns, and first of all, I could prove that fairies exist because I live in California. And I don't know what you guys are laughing about. I'm talking about Disneyland. What? I'm talking about Tinkerbell. What's so funny? And secondly, unicorns. Unicorns, if you look in your local library or just Google it, even up to the 1800s, the species of rhinoceros was called unicorn. So there are unicorns, which if you look on Google or even in your local library, it's just that they don't really call them that anymore. They call them like rhinoceros or rhino. So if you can show that unicorns existed, which I did, then using your logic, then God exists. And we also showed that fairies exist because of, we're talking about California. And then also, there's a guy in here named Patrick, and he claims to be a leprechaun, so we'll see what happens. Okay, guys, look. I could have brought up, I didn't, but I could have brought up how we have a mind. This shows that we're not just atheist flesh blobs. We're not just, it's not just matter in motion. We have a mind. My friend, what was your name again? My friend Nada, he chose to come in here. He chose. He said, I'm going to go into the conference room, and we're glad you did, Nada. Also, ghost demonic activity is empirical proof of the spiritual realm. These are not, this isn't matter or rocks or stone or dirt. This is something spiritual. The cosmological argument does not really help atheists a lot. If I was an atheist, the worst thing I would bring up is cosmological and teleological argument. Those arguments are theistic arguments that aid theism. I also could bring up prophecies that came true, near-death experiences, which show there's definitely something besides matter and motion. There's something else within us, these near-death experiences where people can go outside their body and see things. That cannot be a material process. How could their eyeballs pop out of their brains and walk up 5 stories, hospital steps? If you go to ShockofGod, go to our music podcast area, they're peer-reviewed near-death experiences. Experiential reality, how Christians experience God within their lives, and an atheist is able to give us some sort of defeater. The Christian is rational to believe that God exists. Now, I totally have no doubt that Nada knows God exists. So whenever I go into a debate, I don't believe for one moment that he doesn't know that God exists. I do believe that Romans is right in the first page of Romans when it says that people do know God exists, but they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So I totally believe that Nada knows God exists. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind. I'm not convinced that he doesn't, and his arguments are proof and evidence that he does know God exists, since the arguments are actually pointing to God's existence, not against it. DNA is empirical proof of design. But the last 2 things that I'll talk about is this, and I think you guys will get a kick out of it. Have you guys noticed on YouTube, and Nada, you'll agree with me on this, my friend, that why do atheists always bash God, but they never bash Satan? Isn't that kind of suspicious? I think Jesus was right when he said to the people that rejected him, hey, look, you do the will of your Father. And he was referring to them doing the will of their father, Satan. You know, why is it that atheists bash God so much, but they never bash Satan? I think it's because we know, in the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? We know who the daddy is. Another thing I want to talk about is, you know, there's over 150 million brutal murders, rapes, atrocities under the evil atheist regimes of Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il, the Khmer Rouge. And what's really amazing is, and Nada, I would like to hear your opinion on this if you want. What's really amazing is, don't you think what they did was evil? Because you know what, my friend, and I don't mean to broad brush you with all the other atheists we've debated, but I've talked to atheists and they say, well, what those atheist regimes did was subjective. It wasn't objectively evil. So that's kind of weird to me too. And the last thing that I want to kind of mention is, look, the best that atheism can give you in the end is death. Because on the atheist worldview, the universe dies and all of humanity dies. There will be no God that steps in on the atheist view that saves humanity. But science has already shown that unless someone steps in, God steps in, something steps in and stops the universe from going cold, and it'll just go dark, and everyone in the world and the universe, everything will be will die. On the atheist worldview, the best that they can offer you, the end result, is death. And that's not my argument. They'll tell you that to your face, that yeah, that's true. I think atheists take their quest to death too seriously. If you guys already know you're marching to death, which is what atheist is, it's a death march. Atheism's a death march. Why be so serious about it? Just take your march quietly and go enjoy it. But contrast that with the Christian worldview where Jesus said, look, I'm telling you the truth. I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. The Christian worldview, taken at its face, on face value, ends in life. The atheist worldview, taken at its face, I'm not adding anything or I'm not exaggerating what atheists say. I used to be an atheist. Is look what Actual says. Take your march to death quietly and don't try to drag others down with you. Yes, that's really what I meant to say. Thanks, Actuarial, for bringing that up. Now, you know, when you really think about it, this is what I don't understand, is if the atheist worldview ends in death, then isn't it true, if they really believed it, that they think that we're, as Christians, are going there with them? If they really believed it, you don't have to be an evangelical atheist. Just take your death march by yourself, because after all, if you really believed atheism, we're going there with you, right? After all, the worldview of atheism is everyone ends up into the dirt. So it doesn't make sense for an atheist to be evangelical about their atheism, because if they really believed it, even if they didn't preach their atheism to us, isn't it true that on their worldview we're supposed to end up in the dirt? The fact that atheists try to preach atheism shows they don't believe it themselves. They're trying to convince us to go down there with them, like Actuarial said, misery loves company. But it makes sense for Christians to preach the gospel because we believe that it does affect a change. We believe that there is a hell and there is a heaven, that there is a spiritual place where you distance yourself from God, and there's a spiritual place where you are eternally with God. So it makes sense for the Christian to preach, but it doesn't make sense for an atheist to preach. In closing, let me just say this. It all boils down to life or death. If you like death, hey, you can walk like lockstep like the atheist Nazis, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Austin Dacey. Well, actually, Richard Dawkins now is front sliding. He's not backsliding, he's front sliding. He's an agnostic now. He says that, yes, God can exist. So my last sentence, because I want to finish this, is we haven't heard any arguments against God's existence. I brought up mind, ghosts, demonic activity. We both brought up the cosmological, teleological argument, but that doesn't in no way help atheism. That goes against atheism. We talk about prophecies that came true, near-death experiences. There's like the 1948 prophecy that came true of Israel being gathered again to herself, the prophecy, the Isaiah 53 prophecy in Isaiah that talks about Jesus Christ, near-death experiences and how Christians experience reality, DNA, which is empirical proof of design. We talked about how atheists really have no objective purpose in life. Their goal is just to die. And my parting shot is atheism is a lot like bees. Atheists are a lot like bees. They try to sting you with their arguments, but in the end, they just die. So I'll get off the mic and I'll let you say something. And I guess that's it. We haven't heard any arguments against God's existence. I brought up like 9 or 10 for God's existence. So I think it's quite obvious that the more rational conclusion is Christianity.
I'd first like to address the whole mind thing. We know that the mind seems to be fairly dependent on the brain in order to even operate properly. You can shove a metal rod through your front lobe and you will be a completely different person. Any notion of personhood, which seems to be attached to qualities of personality and experience and personal history, would just be completely changed by the having a metal rod shoved through your brain. As for Hitler, Hitler probably was not a Christian, I'll give you that. He had some very strange religious views. Definitely not an atheist either. Probably some sort of warped deist. Mao, Pol Pot, Stalin, all atheists, but all heavily into dogmatic political beliefs. And I think that's where their whole idea came from. They were essentially full of political religion. And as for me bringing up the cosmological and teleological arguments, I was trying to point out what was actually flawed with those arguments. With the design, the universe seeming to be fine-tuned, I don't think we can attribute that to a creator because we just don't have enough evidence yet. So the position I'm taking is not to believe in a God because I haven't seen that to be demonstrated. And also, we don't have any other universes to examine. We don't know what a chaotic universe would look like. So we don't have any frame of reference there. You can't know what cold is without knowing what hot is. You need a frame of reference. Back to ghosts and prophecies. Prophecies, they're very vague. You can fit almost anything into those prophecies, and I could make a prophecy today like I think in 5,000 years people are going to wear shoes, and it doesn't really seem very convincing. And with Israel and all that, Israel was reestablished because people made it happen, not because God made it happen. If there were more specific facts contained within prophecies, that still wouldn't prove them true. It would mean we'd have to investigate them more. But for instance, if the prophecy foretold that Israel would be reestablished in 1948, and after a man named Hitler decimated the Jewish population in Eastern Europe, that may be worth looking into more. And as for spirits and souls, again, you can't prove their existence because there's no way to test for that. You do have to. There needs to be more investigation. You can't just assert things based on Messiah's bones not be broken. Well, I'd have to look into that one, but I think you'd need more work to prove that it was Jesus's bones, not someone else's. For instance, the Shroud of Turin was proved to be a fraud. Well, I think what do I have anything else I want to say? Nah, I think I'm good.
All right. Hey, well, I wanted to talk about the mind thing that you said. I agree with you on that. How you said, how someone's brain would be injured and then they have a hard time with the signals being sent to the brain and getting themselves. And that's my whole point exactly. You agree with me that there's our mind and our brain. And so you and I kind of agree. We agree with that. And so that's good. At least we've come to some agreement. You're absolutely right. Remember when Christopher Hitchens had the accident on the horse? Christopher Reeves. I'm sorry. I don't want to compare Christopher Hitchens. Remember when Christopher Reeves had the... I always bring up Christopher Hitchens. Well, can I talk about Christopher Hitchens too? Christopher Hitchens was asked if bestiality was wrong, and he evaded the question. He wouldn't answer it. Because on his worldview of atheism, he can't say things are objectively wrong. If you go to ShockofGod.net, go to our debates area, you can see someone in the audience asking him that, and he won't say, look, I want to go on record to say that bestiality is always wrong. It's objectively wrong. See how easy that was? But Christopher Reeves, not Hitchens, remember when he had the horse accident, the riding accident, and he said like what you were saying. I totally agree with you. He was saying that his mind, he wanted to get up and walk, but because he had the injury, he couldn't do it. And what you and I are talking about, I think, you know, you kind of are helping me with that argument. That's what I was talking about is it's obvious that we have this free will. We're not just cells and matter. We can control our brains with our mind. Our mind is separate. In other words, when you and I are happy, Nada, our brain's not happy. We are happy, right? When you and I are sad, our brain's not sad. We are sad. So I used to be an atheist too, and I can tell, and I mean this very sincerely, I can tell you're more of an intelligent, I mean this sincerely, I'm more of an intelligent, sincere person. And people have seen me debate before. I don't always say that, but I could tell you're like not afraid to go where the evidence is. I was the same way when I was an atheist, so I think it's pretty cool, and I'm glad you came in here. Okay. Now, you know how you're talking about the prophecy of Israel, 1948 coming true? That's the thing. I agree with you, is if there's all types of countries that meet this prophecy, then you and I would agree, well, what's so impressive about that? The problem, though, I had as an atheist is there's a lot of countries that have come and gone through world history, and only one country met that prophecy, Israel. Only one. That's impressive, man. That impressed me. There's no other country in world history that has met that prophecy. So that's pretty impressive. And then I strongly encourage people to read the prophecy in Isaiah, which is referring to by his stripes we are healed. Talks about how they get for clothing, etc. And then other prophecies that actually had came true. If you go to ShockofGod.net and click prophecy, I have a whole list of them there. So that what I'm seeing is, when I was an atheist, I left atheism because of the lack of proof and evidence. It is the atheist that believes in a worldview of which there is no evidence, and evidence is important to me. I don't have enough blind faith to be an atheist. I just can't rationally say, well, so the prophecies came true. Well, so we do have a mind. Well, so the universe was created from nothing. You know, well, I can't turn a blind eye to these awesome things that have happened throughout history and just say, I'm going to be an atheist based on faith. Now, when you play back the debate, you'll notice that we didn't hear any arguments against God's existence, and I agree with you, you're one of the brave type of atheists that come in here. You said, quote, you cannot prove that God doesn't exist. You said, well, you can't prove a negative. Well, that's not true. You can. All you got to do is show that something is self-contradictory. And that's why I left atheism, because my Christian friends were able to show me that atheism is self-contradictory. For example, if you talk to Christians and you ask them, does God exist, you know, and you open up Scripture, Scripture clearly claims God exists. I don't hear Christians saying it's impossible for God to exist. Christianity simply claims God exists. But what we hear coming out of atheism is that it's impossible for God to exist. I know you didn't say that. You believe it's possible. And possible for God to exist. But that's coming out of atheism. It's coming out of one place. So you can see why atheism is in global decline worldwide, why Christianity is still growing. You have the Christian theists saying God exists, but out of atheism, number one, we have no arguments against God's existence. Number two, we got atheists saying, yes, it is possible that God can exist. And number three, atheists will bring up unicorns, and we've already shown that unicorns are a species of rhino. We've also showed that fairies exist in California because I'm by Disneyland. So you see what I'm saying? I mean, this is why people are just not convinced that atheism is true. And I have to tell you guys, I used to be an atheist, and I tried my hardest to find some type of proof and evidence that atheism is accurate and correct. And it all boiled down to be an atheist, you have to be an atheist based on blind faith, not arguments. So let's go through. I just want to sum up the debate here. Let's go through the arguments that the atheist said. Right out of the gate, he says he can't prove God doesn't exist. Well, right there, I believe that I can prove that atheism is not true. I can prove it. Any worldview that says it's possible for God to and impossible for God to exist, right out of the gate is untrue because it's contradicting itself on a major issue. Does God exist? Now, I've heard some people say, but wait a minute, Shock, the Catholics say one thing, the Protestants say one thing, the Jews say one thing. Yeah, they're all worshiping God differently, but they're all saying God exists. But what you have in atheism is you got some saying it's impossible for God to exist and some saying it's possible, plus the lack of any arguments against God's existence. And then we have the teleological argument, which there's only 3 possible explanations for the fine-tuning. If you'd like to come up with another one, I'm all ears, but I think you and I would agree it's either dumb luck and chance, physical necessity, or design. Well, it can't be due to dumb luck and chance. And you brought up, by the way, you brought up other universes. I'll talk about that. It can't be due to dumb luck and chance because the odds of the fine-tuning coming into existence just by dumb luck and chance, it's impossible because chance... hey, Patrick, by the way, are you ready, Patrick? And by the way, I want you to know that we do have a real leprechaun as a moderator here. And I can prove it to you, I think, if Patrick has his song ready. Just let me know if you're ready, Patrick. So we've already proven that unicorns exist. They were a species of rhinoceros and fairies because, you know, I'm in California with Disneyland. But then you brought up other universes, and there's no evidence for multiverse. And besides Borguth and Vilenkin, 3 of the very best cosmologists, I believe, in the world, they said all evidence shows that the universe had a beginning. And what they said, even if there was a multiverse, then the multiverse would have to have a beginning. So there's no escape. And do you know that Christians are now vindicated by, hey, Princess, Christians are now vindicated by modern science. The atheists were saying the universe was eternal. The Christians always said that it had a beginning. The atheists were 90% being supported by science, but that was back in the old, outdated horse and buggy days of Darwinism. Now with modern science, it is flip-flopped in favor of Christian view that the universe had a beginning. In fact, Borguth and Vilenkin said all evidence shows the universe had a beginning. Anthony Kinney of Oxford University says, look, if someone's an atheist, they got a big problem. They have to believe the universe came from nothing or by nothing. Now I ask everyone here, what do you honestly think is more rational? Nothing did it and created the universe, or a powerful God created the universe? I think we all know, oh, no problem, Patrick. I think we all know that rational people will say, well, obviously nothing can't do it because nothing is the absence of anything. And until atheists can come up with some type of reason how the universe could create itself ex nihilo out of nothing because there was no pre-existing matter, energy, or anything, this is why theism is 97% of the world population, why atheism is a squeak and we're knocking it down to half a squeak. They're only like 3% at best of the world population. Another thing, too, is you brought up evolution, so I want to, out of respect to you, I want to talk about that. The only thing that has been proven is really the creation side of evolution. What I mean by that is change within limits. But every creationist, and I'm a creationist, every creationist I know believes within change within limits. The problem, though, is they haven't proven macroevolution. That is, everything evolves from the simple to the complex. And in fact, you know who Dr. William Lane Craig is. Also, if you check out creation.com, everyone, even the major evolutionists, they're admitting now tons of them are admitting. They're even signing documents. If you go to creation.com, you can see major evolutionists signing onto documents. And a lot of these evolutionists are saying, look, the neo-Darwinian theory is dead. It's dead. It'll be dead before this century. It's dead. So, you know, if I was an atheist, I'd be terrified, because now the only game in town that atheists could play, evolution, even the creationists are taking that away from them. And, you know, we've already won the universe. That's back into the hands of Christian theists. And now we're winning the creation argument. Thanks to the good people at creation.com. I want to put a plug in for you guys. Should hey, don't kick out RIC, because I'm recording on the other page. I'm on my other laptop. Someone kicked me out. I got kicked out of my own room. Anyways, let me get off the mic. And now, by the way, hey, do you want to do, Mr. Knott, do you want to do that thing? It's up to you. Do you want to do the thing where we ask each other one question? Because I have one question, and it's up to you if you want to answer it. It's a very softball question. Here's the question. How many transitional fossils have we discovered? And I'll get off the mic and give me an approximate number, give or take 10 or 20. How many transitional fossils have we discovered? And go ahead, Mr. Knott. And then you could ask me a question, and I'll give you my opinion on it.
We have found many transitional fossils. In fact, every fossil is a transitional fossil because species are constantly evolving. If you want to refer to hominids specifically, we've found modern Homo sapiens, archaic Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalensis, Homo erectus, Australopithecus afarensis, and I think a few others too, but I'm not too familiar with them.
Well, I want to address that, but do you have a question for me? Because I'm going to get on there, because those are not transitional fossils, by the way. A lot of them have already been proven fraudulent. But let me get off the mic, and do you have any questions or any opinions? You want me to give you my opinion on something? Just type in MIC. I'll start blabbing on your thing. Here's the problem with saying everything is a transitional fossil. When we're talking about a transitional fossil, we're talking about a fossil that will show species to species transit. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Knott.
Why would God allow Satan to exist and thwart his plans?
Okay, cool. First, let me answer your question, and then I'll get onto it. You know, it's interesting that God gives all of us free will. You could say that atheists are going against what God's plan would be for their life, eternal salvation, to come into a loving relationship with God. And what I think is confusing to atheists, they don't understand it, is they look at God as Santa Claus. And they picture God's goal for us is happiness, and we're like his little pets in like a terrarium. And he's supposed to protect us from evil. And that's the atheist mindset because of Santa syndrome. You guys should look up Santa syndrome on YouTube. But that is not God's goal. When you read Scripture, it's clear why evil exists in the world is because the angels had free will. You and I have free will. In other words, why would you go ahead and worship Satan like atheists do? Why would you willingly do what Jesus said not to do? He said, hey, look, your father is Satan. It's because you have free will. Now, obviously, why am I choosing not to follow Satan like atheists do? Because I have free will. I believe it's a spiritual thing. And I believe the more people choose to be drawn to the Spirit, the more they'll be in, in God's will. So I could ask you the same thing. Atheists are a lot like Satan. It doesn't make sense. God gives us this free will, but we choose to rebel against it. But I could say this too. A lot of people will say, well, wait a minute, Shock. Are you saying that atheists are just willfully ignorant and they're going against God's will? Yeah, we all know people that are drug addicts, and they did it, they're drug addicts. We all know people like that. They dilute themselves. But if you read Scripture, and maybe you haven't read Scripture, it talks about Satan actually choosing to rebel against God. He actually chose to do it. And right there I'll kind of go through some things for you because I think it's real beautiful. Right there in Genesis, I think a lot of the blame has to go on mankind also, because we could have went ahead and said, well, we reject what Satan says. Remember how Satan said, no, partake of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't listen to what God says. He just doesn't want you to be like him. But what did mankind do? They bought into Satan's lie, which is what you're doing as an atheist. And I think because it's appealing to say, you know what, I'll be my own God, so to speak, and just to buy into Satan's lie. Now, it could have went the other way. Mr. Nada, let's say that you were Adam, and let's say you chose not to go ahead and follow Satan. Then sin wouldn't have been entered into this world. It could have went that way. But then, carried to its logical conclusion, it can go that way right now, but why? In other words, why would you choose to go ahead and follow Satan? It doesn't make any sense to me. I just did a video on this called Christmas Saved My Life, and I talked about it that I believe it's something spiritual. I don't know why someone would choose to reject God. It's obviously that you know God exists because you haven't given any arguments against God's existence. So I've come to the conclusion that it is spiritual. It's a spiritual thing. Now, not to make this a personal thing about you, Mr. Knott, but what I have found is when people choose to reject God, there's something they're doing in their life that they know they shouldn't be doing, and it kind of holds them back from that. So I believe the reason why Satan was able to do what he wanted to do is God gave him free will and he abused it. Same thing with atheists. I believe the reason why atheists choose to do the things that they do is God gave them free will and they abused it. They're just like their dad. Now onto the fossil thing. You said that everything is a transitional fossil, but that's already been proven to be false. We have many whale fossils that are of the same species. They haven't transitioned to anything. And when you said that, like the entire room was like, oh, fail. There's tons of fossils. We have many horse fossils. They haven't transitioned to any other species. They're still the same species. So you can't say that every single thing is a transitional fossil. The question I asked was this: how many transitional fossils have we discovered? And then you said everything is a transitional fossil. But that's not true. I would strongly suggest people go to creation.com and you'll see. Well, can I just show you something real quick, and then you guys can get back on, and if we could have a minute, I wanted to show you that slide, but I remember. Well, Darwin, I know it by heart. Darwin talked about the problem of the lack of transitional fossils, and the problem still remains. And the top evolutionists, they're admitting that, hey, you know what, there is a problem with, we don't have these transitional fossils. You know that tree of life, that Darwinian tree of life, it's not based on fossil evidence at all. It's fake. It's all fraud. That little cartoon tree of life, it's based on conjecture. Guys, just to kind of sum up, and then you guys can get on the mic, is we went through the for God's existence. We talked about objective moral. Well, I didn't talk about that. I made it easy. We talked about cosmological, teleological, prophecies that came true, how Christians experience reality of God's existence, DNA, which is empirical proof of design. But we haven't even received one argument against God's existence. In fact, he yes, God can exist. He said he can't prove that God doesn't exist. And your arguments on your side was unicorns, fairies, and leprechauns. Can you see why atheism is worldwide, folks? I think it's obviously clear that Christian theism is a more plausible, rational conclusion. All right, Mr. Knott, if you want to get on the mic again. And then Mr. Knott, would you mind, after you're done, if I let some people get on the mic and kind of explain to you about the transitional fossil problem? Would you mind? Would someone want to get on I see Moses, the guy Moses in the room is spamming. If someone wants to get on the mic, yeah, and notice Nephilim is saying unicorns, fairies, and leprechauns prove God. Yeah, I don't get that. I don't get how someone saying unicorns, fairies, and leprechauns would prove atheism's true and God doesn't exist. I never got that. Okay, Actuarial, why don't you get on, and while you're doing it, would you type in your name, Actuarial, how it's spelled, and I'll set up your mod code again? Yeah, and I want you guys to listen to this. And Actuarial, I'm recording this, so I want you to listen to Actuarial because he's going to talk to you about why you guys shouldn't be saying everything's a transitional fossil. So listen to this, guys, and really take this in. This is good. Let me be setting up your mod code.
Hey guys, so I want to talk a little bit about evolution. I forget who the guy that Shock was, is it Mr. Not Tuck or something that Shock was debating with? I just want to make some points about evolution. First of all, I want to make the point that if evolution is true, nothing theological really follows. So, I mean, even if the whole neo-Darwinian story was true, it still may follow that God exists, that Jesus Christ died for our sins, and that he'll come again and rule forever and ever. I mean, I don't see how the two contradict each other. So, in fact, Alvin Plantinga created an evolutionary argument against naturalism. So, in other words, you cannot both hold to the reliability of your cognitive faculties and hold to evolution, because evolution and also hold to naturalism. So if you hold to evolution and naturalism, which are sort of bedfellows normally, you can't reliably hold to the reliability of your faculties. So it's a very fascinating argument. I'm not going to get into it right now. If you guys want me to expound, I'm going to do that. But there is such an argument. You can look it up. There's a good video on it with Robert Lawrence Kuhn, but that's just a side note. The thing I wanted to address was every fossil is a transitional fossil. So, yeah, right. Francis Collins supports common descent. Exactly. So, in fact, Francis Collins even supposes that by the neo-Darwinian synthesis, life may have came about. But the thing is, he's a very ardent Christian, and Collins may be wrong, as Neff said. So, again, very little theology hangs on this. But this is an important topic because atheists tend to put evolution and atheism together. So if you bring down the evolution side of things, then the atheism side tends to crumble down with it. That's why people use evolution as an argument against atheism. Or even why disproving evolution would also tend to disprove people's atheism, because atheists fallaciously put the two together. So let's deal with the whole transitional fossil thing. Every fossil is not a transitional fossil. If you see a fossil buried in the ground, you don't know whether it bore any offspring at all. That's objection one. I mean, that's trivially true. We don't know whether, I don't know, the catfish that's in the rock strata had any eggs that happened to multiply and create other catfish, right? That's one. Two, the vast majority of creatures, even on the neo-Darwinian synthesis, would produce creatures that are much the same as the previous ones. So if you have a catfish or whatever, it would probably create more catfish. So that's not even a transitional fossil right there. Only very rarely would you see a creature create something that's not close to itself by whatever Gould's punctuated equilibrium mechanism. Such things would be very rare and in small populations. So even on Darwinian orthodoxy, it is not true that every fossil is a transitional fossil. And third of all, fossils of species that are extinct. They don't produce anything after that. They just kind of die off. So those don't produce, those aren't transitional either. So I think that's just a sort of a stock statement that people use, and I'm very grateful that proponents of neo-Darwinian synthesis use the statement that every fossil is transitional, because even on their own theory, that's false. So that's one thing. That's one thing that I wanted to say. There's a whole slew of evidence against the mechanism of neo-Darwinian synthesis. I think the most powerful nail in the coffin for me is the evidence from mutating replicators. So, in other words, you have large amounts of creatures, say maybe a parasite like the malarial parasite, which has been very extensively studied, and how it mutates over time. We have very good studies on how that works. There was a drug called chloroquine, which was introduced and killed off malarial parasites, and malaria found a way to adapt to it. So that's an example of evolution right there, using the proposed neo-Darwinian mechanism. Scientists sequenced the parasite, and off the top of my head, I think it was something like 3 point mutations in 3 separate areas were required in order to create a sufficient change in the protein structure of the parasite to make it resistant to the chloroquine. And scientists estimate that something like 10 to the power of 20 creatures were required in order to seek out that solution. So if it takes 10 to the power 20 creatures to seek out a 3-point mutation solution, how many creatures would it take, using very simple math, to seek out a 6-point mutation solution? It would take that squared. It would take 10 to the power 40 creatures to seek a solution that takes 6-point mutations in order to accomplish. But the problem is that 10 to the power 40 creatures is probably the amount of cells that ever existed, like, on Earth since it began. So that's really kind of an upper bound, I'd say a very generous upper bound, to what the neo-Darwinian synthesis can search for in its scope. Anything above that, for example, if you have a new protein, maybe 200 or 300 amino acids long or something, which is fairly typical, you would need probabilistic resources that far, far, far outweigh those that are available. So I think that that's just one of the reasons why more and more scientists, I mean, mathematicians have been on this stuff for a long time. Famous mathematician John von Neumann saw the proposed neo-Darwinian mechanism. He just laughed at it. The same thing with Fred Hoyle. I mean, mathematicians have been on this for a long time. But even biological scientists. There was a Swedish guy who I think published a book recently. I forget his name, and the book is something like Evolution Without Neo-Darwinism or something. I forget the name, but I know that there's more and more of this type of thing going on, even among people who used to be ardent proponents of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. So, okay, let's read some of the comments here. Mr. Nautuck said, bacteria and virus are constantly adapting to new vaccines. Yes, that's true. But the thing is, in order to adapt to a new vaccine or a new, I don't know, antibiotic or something, you would need to, the bacteria or virus needs to maybe have 1 or 2 point mutations in order to overcome it. So the way that I don't know, say an antibiotic works is that it attacks one of the proteins inherent within the bacteria, and a protein has a very special shape to it. If there's like 1 point mutation, 2 point mutations, if maybe the antibiotic is very effective, 3 point mutations that need to be made in order for the protein to change shape for the bacteria to not be affected by the antibiotic anymore. So that's usually what happens. The shape changes slightly of the protein, and the antibiotic becomes useless against it. That's generally how these things work. So it's true that that viruses and bacteria are constantly evolving, but they're evolving on a scale and using mathematical models that show a very definite limit to the synthesis, is what I'd have to say. So Mr. Nautuck, you're right that bacteria and viruses do evolve, but their evolution is very strong evidence of a very strict limit to neo-Darwinian synthesis. So I'm going to let you guys respond to some of the stuff I said. I just want to say that this type of evidence has, I've never heard any good responses to it, first of all. Second of all, my sister works in the pharmaceutical industry, and she knows PhD molecular biologists who are convinced by evidence along these lines. And I'd like to hear your response to it. So you guys can try and respond, or whoever has the mic next.
I'll give a few cents worth, and I won't be long. If evolution were true, plantimals should exist. In other words, there should be no distinction between kingdoms. There shouldn't be just animals and plant. There should be something in between. Because if natural selection is the mechanism by which evolution occurs, then anything that is beneficial would be retained by evolution, by natural selection, and anything that's not would be selected away for. So as soon as creatures developed a precursor to photosynthesis, it would have occurred prior to, in the molecular biology of the precursor to both plants and animals. Therefore, it should be found in both plants and animals. Something like plants and animals combined should exist if evolution is true.